Let me say something that might bother some people. Visualization doesn't work, at least not the way most people are doing it. If visualization worked so well the way it's sold, vision boards would be wildly successful, and people wouldn't keep manifesting the same problems year after year. So today, I'd like to talk to you about why visualization usually fails, and more importantly, what actually does work. Because the future doesn't respond to wishful thinking, it responds to something very specific. We've been taught that if we just picture the future clearly, we feel it emotionally, and repeat it often enough, the universe will somehow rearrange itself. And for a small percentage of people, that seems to work, which keeps the myth alive. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are visualizing a future while staying anchored to the same identity, habits, and delusions that created their current life. You can't install a new future on top of an old operating system. And that's why motivation fades. That's why affirmations feel fake. And that's why nothing sticks. Visualization becomes mental entertainment, not a mechanism for real change. When you visualize without action, the mind treats it like imagination. The nervous system never really commits, and the future stays abstract. In TRV terms, the timeline never stabilizes. It stays fluid, uncommitted, unresponsive, because the future doesn't lock in when you see it. It locks in when you move toward it in a physical reality, even a small movement, especially small ones. At Zygon, we don't call this visualization. We call it visioneering, a term I coined in the mid-'80s when I was first developing Zygon. Visualization implies passivity, laying back, imagining, hoping. Visioneering is much different. Visioneering means you're actively engineering the future that you're about to live. You're not asking the future to show up, you're building the conditions that make it inevitable. And that's the difference that changes everything. There are three paths to visioneering. If you miss any one of these, the future stays theoretical. Get all three aligned and life starts responding and moving your goals into reality. Step one, direction, not outcomes. Most people visualize outcomes: more money, better health, a happier life. But outcomes don't actually move reality. Direction does. So visioneering starts by defining a future that forces behavior to change. For example, instead of "I want more money," the direction becomes "I'm transitioning into work where I'm paid for my insight, not my hours." Instead of "I want a better relationship," the direction becomes "I'm no longer staying in dynamics where I have to abandon myself." Instead of "I want a healthier life," the direction becomes "I'm restructuring my days so my energy comes first." Notice what happens when you say it in that way to yourself. There's some tension. It's a dynamic because once you define direction clearly, you know something has to change, and it creates motion. That's how you know it's real. If your visualization doesn't quietly demand a next step, you're still fantasizing, and this isn't good enough to move the ball. A real future always implies movement. Step two, coherence, removing your internal veto. This is where most people sabotage themselves without realizing it. They picture a new future while still protecting the identity that belongs to the old one. They want freedom, but not uncertainty. They want purpose, but not discomfort. They want change, but not consequences. The future doesn't argue with that. It just agrees. Because your internal system responds to permission, not desire. So visioneering requires coherence. which means asking one honest question. What version of me cannot come along if this future is real? Maybe it's the reliable one, the people pleaser, the one who plays it safe, the one who waits until it feels comfortable. Until you're willing to release that identity, the future remains hypothetical. Coherence isn't positivity, it's alignment with the new reality. It's the moment you quietly say, even if this costs me, I'm in. And then step 3, action, the lock-in point. This is the engineering step, the part that's missing from all the theoretical aspects of doing this right. A future does not lock in when you imagine it. It locks in when you cross the line into physical reality. One action, not 10, not all sorts of things that are not achievable right now, something actionable right now. But it must meet 3 criteria. It must cost you something so there's a commitment. Make retreat harder so you can't just quit when you start. Signal a commitment to reality itself. In other words, cross a line into the theoretical, into the real world. Let me give you a real world example, my own case. I started a business in my early 20s and was still unsure of myself, had no real money and didn't even really have the skill. But I was determined and knew that I could do it. So I went out and I rented a small office and I put out a sign. For me, that was crossing a line that said, I'm serious. I have to pay rent now, and I need to show the world that I'm in business. Well, it worked. I never looked back. That year, I moved into a bigger location, hired employees, and I was launched. It was getting the office that forced me to move into that reality. Someone might visualize leaving their job for years. They read books, they journal, they imagine, but nothing ever changes until they take action. That's the moment the timeline shifts, because that action creates a point of no return. And here's what happens next every time. Fear spikes, resistance shows up, uncertainty gets louder, and for a lot of people, that means they made a mistake. Well, they didn't. That's your environment responding. Self-doubts, sure. But before action, the future's always quiet. Then after the action, it starts talking back, and you press through it. This is the cruel part. Most people stop the moment things get uncomfortable. Their little voice inside says, this doesn't feel right. Everything feels uncertain. Maybe this wasn't meant to be. Not sure I should continue. Nope, that's exactly what it feels like when you step into a new branch of reality. The old timeline resists being left, and the new one tests your commitment. Visualization alone never triggers this. Action does. This is where tools like technical remote viewing fundamentally change the game, because visioneering still requires one critical thing: knowing which future to engineer. Most people don't struggle with effort, they struggle with directional certainty. They ask, which path actually works? Which opportunity matters? What's a distraction and what's a gateway? That's where TRV comes in. TRV doesn't just show you a possible future. It allows you to collect intelligence on the future, the same way you'd collect intelligence on a location or an event. Not through guessing, not through intuition alone, but through a structured, repeatable protocol. When applied to the future, TRV answers very specific questions. Which future trajectory is optimal for me? What decision points matter and which ones don't? What are the gateways that change everything? What actions stabilize the right timeline? Instead of imagining 10 possible lives, you identify the one that actually aligns. We call this your optimum trajectory. Now, visioneering becomes precise. You're not motivating yourself blindly, you're moving towards something verified, that's real and doable. And this is how the future gets created. TRV was developed inside U.S. military intelligence in the 1980s to solve problems that couldn't be solved any other way as an intelligence collection tool. The breakthrough was simple but profound: to give the mind a structured protocol and a language for non-local perception. The ability becomes trainable, and once installed, it's on demand. Visioneering is the engine. TRV is like the navigation system, and together they do something most systems can't. They turn the future from a mystery into a deliberate construction project. Most people drift, not because they're lazy, but because they're guessing at life. When you can see your trajectory, identify the gateways, and then take actions that lock it in, life stops feeling random and chaotic. It starts feeling intentional. And that's where visioneering stops being theory and becomes something you live and operate your future with. Let's do the Q&A and clear up some of the big questions. Does this mean that visualization is useless? No, visualization isn't useless. It's just incomplete by itself. Visualization is best understood as like a preview. It lets you see what's possible and emotionally sample a future and orient your attention toward it. But a preview doesn't install anything. It's like looking at blueprints without picking up a tool. The mistake people make is stopping there, thinking clarity alone should move reality. It doesn't. Visualization shows you the direction. Visioneering requires that you move. How big does the action have to be? Not big in the dramatic sense, but big in the irreversible sense. The action has to cross a line where you can't honestly say, I didn't really choose this. That might look like putting time or money at stake, or changing your schedule in a visible way, having a conversation that you can't take back, saying no to something that used to define you. It doesn't have to impress anyone else. It just has to register with reality. If the action doesn't change your behavior tomorrow, it won't change your future either. Why does fear show up right after clarity? Because clarity threatens your identity, the old you. When you clearly see a future that's different from your current life, part of you realizes, I can't stay who I am anymore. Fear isn't a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's a sign that the old identity is losing relevance. The nervous system resists change before the mind understands it, and that's normal. What most people interpret as a warning is actually confirmation that a shift has begun. Fear doesn't mean to stop. It means you're crossing a threshold. Keep moving. How do I know if resistance means I'm off track? Well, now this is important because there's two kinds of resistance. One says, this is misaligned. Something's wrong. This isn't me. The other one says, this is unfamiliar territory. It's uncomfortable, but I'm staying in it. Visioneering teaches you to feel the difference. Misalignment feels draining and contracting. Resistance to change feels tense but alive. One weakens you, the other sharpens you. Learning to tell them apart is part of becoming directional instead of reactive. So what if I choose the wrong future? Well, you already are every day. Doing nothing is a choice. Staying where you are is a trajectory. Most people live life randomly and they wait for circumstances to manage them versus the other way around. And tools like TRV reduce guesswork by showing which paths dead end and which ones align with who you're becoming. Here's what I want to leave you with. The future isn't something you attract. It's something you engineer through choice, alignment, and movement. Most people stand at the edge of their best life, imagining it, talking about it, waiting to feel ready, but never really jumping in fully. And that's sad because readiness doesn't come first. Movement does. Once you step forward, the timeline responds automatically. And when you know which step to take, the future stops being a mystery and it becomes a destination. You want to learn how to identify the right future, the right gateways, and the actions that lock them in place? Well, that's what we teach inside Zygon, both Visioneering and TRV. The details are below if you're interested, and I'll see you on the inside.